What is up, everybody? Hopefully you guys are doing great. As always, my name is Itai. Today I analyzed one of my viewers' gameplay in hopes of showing you the key learnings and ideas that you can implement into your own games. In fact, in this gameplay analysis specifically, I ended up showing you one of the most key tactical opportunities that most likely you can implement into any opening, any position that will give you a much higher chance of success. If you want me to analyze your gameplay, then you can submit your games via the form in the description. And if you have general ideas for what videos you want to see, tactics, tips, tricks, openings, strategical videos, whatever it may be, then leave them in the comments below. Subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you next time. So this game started with the Ruy Lopez, obviously going ahead and putting the bishop on b5, and now it transposed into the 4 knights kind of variation, but what you want to understand as black is with the Ruy Lopez, the only part protecting this pawn here is this knight. So if this knight were to get taken, this pawn would hang. So you want to make sure that you are, you could play a move like this, for instance, but regardless, you want to play a move that will ensure that this pawn is safe. Because right now, as if you were to just play a random move, right now you could easily take this as white and win a pawn. Unfortunately, both sides missed out on this actually, and black decided to move out their bishop, which could look nice for black to castle earlier, but again, just missing out on this opportunity, and white didn't see it either and decided to play h3. Now, h3 is not a bad move, regardless of where you're going to castle. If you decide to castle on the queen side, h3 is nice because it could become h4. If you decide to castle on the king side, h3 is nice because it could, serve as an escape route for the king. But h3 is horrible right now. You can easily win a pawn, and even if you decide not to win the pawn, just castling earlier right now, especially when this bishop here might eventually stop you from castling. So I would recommend castling right now, and if you, of course, castling only if you miss this opportunity. But h3 is definitely not that great right now. Regardless, h3 was played, and here black just blunders again. a6. It encourages white to capture and win the pawn, and white ends up capturing but not winning the pawn. You always want to be thinking, what are my knights, what are all the knights on the board doing? And a lot of times the knights are going to be protecting a pawn, and so the second that knight falls, say, what was this knight protecting? Is it now hanging? And in this case the answer would be, it's protecting this pawn, and yes, the pawn's hanging, I can capture it. Okay, so that's one key takeaway. Always figure out what is the structure of my opponent. What is protecting what? What is hanging now? Because, this is a very easy move here. Anyways, you don't play it. And again, instead of castling, now you decide to play this move, trying to free out your bishop. I don't think it's horrible, especially if you haven't decided which side you want to castle yet. So, I don't think it's a horrible move playing this move, but certainly I would not. And I mean, winning the pawn. But even if you don't win the pawn, there's other moves that you could play, including castling, right? But this is not a terrible move by any means. Here you go ahead, swing out your bishop, and finally black decides, maybe we should protect the pawn after all. And like I said, if you decide to castle on the king side, you do not want to pawn this up. But now the fact that you've managed to develop your other pieces, and soon your queen, you can castle on the queen side, and then having a pawn at h4 is very useful, especially with the help of queens and rooks. This pawn could easily promote, or not promote, but serve as a pawn up here on h6, which will easily give mating opportunities for you. Okay, so overall, pushing your h-pawn isn't horrible all the time. And now you just trade more knights. This was a pretty good move. This knight is blocking the queen from getting into the game. So now the queen has access to the game. For example, you can't play a move like this and move out your queen because this knight here would be hanging. So it does make you a little bit less comfortable as white. And black hasn't done a wonderful job of getting every piece involved. So having the queen involved is pretty good for black. And you just continue pushing the pawn. It's not horrible. This pawn, I have to admit, is a little overextended, especially when you could trade it eventually. So I would not have pushed the pawn yet, but it isn't a horrible move by any means. And here is here's the tactical opportunity that you can involve in your game, okay? So I would definitely listen here. The rook, and even if your opponent decides to castle queenside, the rooks are wonderful aligned with the kings. The idea with aligning the rook up with the king when you don't have this pawn here is that it allows for you to pin this pawn here, which allows for you to have a huge advantage later on, and a lot of times stack some rooks and maybe a queen and mate. Okay, so let's look how this game evolves. You can see that you ignore this thing here. In fact, moving the queen here, I would move it here. You definitely want to move the queen out of the way to castle, but I would have moved it just here, just more protection. But the idea is after capture with the pawn, you free up this file or the semi-open file for your rook to come and get involved. And the second that this pawn is pinned, there is a lot of things that could happen that are not great for black. So you move this rook over here, and now this pawn is hanging. There's ideas of mating. You could easily push up the pawn eventually and mate with this. You could stack up the rooks once you've castled and mate. You could even try to get your queen stacked up somehow and mate. But essentially, when you get a rook aligned with the king on a semi-open file, it's really great for you. Here, I mean, black needs to make an effort to move their king. Obviously not right now, but for example, after black plays a move like this to protect the pawn, black eventually wants to unpin. But this is a great move. Okay, what actually happened in the game, though, is that black just forgot about this thing here. Although not yet, actually, I have to admit. This bishop is threatening some nasty stuff here. So you want to first protect your pawn. But now black just forgot about it and allowed for you to capture the pawn here, then capture the queen. And you can see how important it is to have this rook here aligned with the king. Before, this pawn was wonderful. It could capture the queen here. It could capture back the queen here. But the rook aligned with the king is a nasty, nasty rook. And you need to respond to it if your opponent does it. And you need to try to, as often as you can, pin pawns in front of kings. Okay, so that is a tactical opportunity that you can involve in regardless of what opening you play. You can involve it in probably your game once your opponent castles, especially if you plan to castle the other side. The rook is free to pin the king. So hopefully you learned some stuff from this video. I think there's a lot of tactical opportunities. The most important one is definitely this, and I hope that you learned that you can do it in your game. Make sure take advantage of unprotected pawns. And beyond that, I hope that you enjoyed this game in the Ruy Lopez opening, and I'll see you next time.